I believe they can, but it depends on whether um, whether they're willing to put in the work to pay back what they did. It also depends upon the crime they committed. If uh, if they murdered someone, then they cannot repay their debt because the person that they would be trying to repay their debt to is deceased, and it affected their family and all the people they know far too much for them to be able to repay it back. But if you just like stole some bread or something, then obviously um, you can just do your time in jail or pay the fine, and your debt is repaid. Also, if you were to do a more serious crime, you can go to jail and obviously do your time there, and then afterwards you can help out around your community, like doing community service or getting into an organization that helps other criminals that have gone through the same thing, and helping youth that um, that have gotten into bad things. Also, you may never truly know if you've repaid your debt because you never know who has been affected by what you have done, even if it is a small crime.
I think the question of whether a criminal can ever truly repay his or her debt to society is a very complex one that you have to consider many facets to when trying to answer. One is whether or not it's a serious crime. I think minor non-violent crimes often can be repaid simply with a prison sentence. You're in jail and you're taken out of society, and so that way you can't harm any more people, and so often you're rehabilitated and taught how to, when you get released from prison, to become a more productive member of society. So I think that's how you can repay a prison sentence for a non-violent crime. However, it gets much more complex when you're trying to answer it for a violent crime like murder, rape, or anything like that. I think then the debt you're trying to pay is to the people you've harmed, the people, the friends of the people, and the communities that you've affected through this crime. Communities are often in fear of that same type of event happening again, and you've taken safety and security and possibly even a life from a person when you've committed a violent crime against them. So I think that type of crime, you have to try to make amends with those people, but it can be very hard to do. So
hello, my name is Gisela Gallardo, and I'm a student teacher here at Thomas Jefferson High School. Yes, I believe that a criminal can repay their debt to society, depending on their case, some circumstances. I believe therapy, community service, other sort of productive means to give back to society is a way of repaying their debt, especially working with kids through education, and really giving back to society in an honest way, and putting in the effort to repay their debt not only physically but also morally as well.
Hey, Palmieri here, and the question is, can a criminal repay his debt to society? I'd have to say that I do believe a criminal can repay his debt to society, dependent on a couple of things. I think they have to undergo a transformation or an epiphany or some kind of change of heart. They have to hook up with either an impactful person who changes the direction their life's going in, or a group of people who can help them get turned around into a positive direction. So let's take, for an example, a murderer who's convicted of murder. He goes to prison for a life sentence. Maybe he's 25 years old. He's going to be there 60 years. So he's locked up in prison for 60 years. And prisons are notoriously bad places. It's real easy to go to the dark side in prison and continue down a criminal life, whether you're dealing in contraband or just going for the power-hungry thing or whatever. But I think if this murderer goes to prison and has a change of heart brought about by, I don't know what, that could be different things for different people. Perhaps they run into a mentor, or they get involved in a program that just kind of opens their eyes changes their heart, perhaps provides some sort of healing for a trauma that they've been involved in that was one of the things that sent them down, the wrong road. I think they can kind of turn it around and even from prison repay their debt to society. Example, while they're in prison for life, there'll be a number of inmates who come through doing a 3 to 5 year sentence, or a 5 to 10 year sentence, or even a 20-year sentence. So if this murderer has that change of heart and decides in his heart he wants to turn his life around and somehow balance the scales a little bit, do good to kind of counteract the damage he's done, obviously taking a person's life, and also the damage to all their friends and family, maybe he could become a mentor or a counselor to some of these criminals who are passing through prison. He'll have credibility because he's a fellow prisoner, so that seems to give people credibility when they've gone through the same thing other people have. So they do have that credibility, and I think if they can rededicate their lives, start sowing good things into other prisoners, mentoring them, counseling them, being their friend, perhaps even they've gone through similar trauma earlier in life, and while they're not a professional like a psychologist or psychiatrist, I think sometimes it's the amateurs who help us best when things are rough in society, someone who befriends us, who understands us, and that murderer could very well spend 60 years in prison sowing good things into the lives of prisoners who are passing through, changing their hearts, giving them a gentle shove or a hard shove if needed in a positive direction. And then as those people are released back out into society, instead of them being all hard and with that criminal mentality, with a chip on their shoulder or whatever causes them to turn to a life of violence and crime, they could go out and be productive members of society. The short answer is yes. I think it is possible with a change of heart, with the right environment, and hooking up with the right people for a criminal to repay his debt to society.
I think it depends on what crime they committed. There are certain crimes where I think the damage is so permanent that no matter what they do, it can never really repay their debt. For instance, if someone takes someone else's life, there's no way to change that. And with sexual assault, there's no way that can be repaired. But certain things can certainly help. If someone did theft, it's something this is fairly monetary. They can help repay that by helping society so that other people might not make those same crimes. So maybe joining, helping the homeless, helping people without brothers, so finding other ways to help people so that they find a way out of their situation other than crime. And that can certainly be one way that they can help repay their debt.
I think it depends on the type of crime, because anything but a non-violent offense is repayable just by prison terms, because in today's society, prison is so hectic and not about rehabilitation, it's about punishment, that I think that serving a 5-year sentence for possession of a felony amount of drugs is more than enough to repay society, because the sentence in itself isn't fit for the crime. It's too severe, in my opinion, for a lot of crimes, because I think that it becomes more complex when it's a violent crime, such as aggravated assault or murder or rape, because that is truly harming somebody. And I think the only way to repay, it's not to repay society, it's to repay that person. And so I think that the repayment of society is not the issue there. It's trying to seek forgiveness from the person or the family of the person that you hurt.
Okay.
I really don't think that any criminal has a debt to repay to society. I think that if they hurt someone, then they have to repay it to that person. And if you're a drug dealer and you know that you caused someone else to overdose, then yeah, maybe you should pay respects to them and their family and think about what you're doing. But to society, no, I think that society screws so many people over anyways that if you're gonna have someone who commits a crime pay a debt to society, then you have to have society repay the debts that all the debts that they've done to the people. So I think that is if you're gonna ask one of one, then you have to ask the same of the other. When a person commits a crime like a felony, even if it's not malicious or violent, it still affects you for your whole life, because a felony sticks on your record for 10 years, and so if you're an 18-year-old kid and you do something that's not malicious, but you make a mistake and you get out in 6 months, a year even, but your felony is still going to be your record till you're 28 years old. It means you can't vote, you can't get a good job, you can't get college funding, you can't get an apartment, so it affects your life for 10 years, even for something that is supposed to be served in 6 months. And because of that, I think that payment is more than enough in a lot of cases.
Well, I believe that most crimes are able to be repaid for. For example, in the case of arson, if you burn a building down, you could always just rebuild it. Or in monetary problems, you could just pay off whatever debt it is you owe. But in the case of murder, even if it is accidental, then it isn't. I don't think it's fully possible, because you can't resurrect the dead. So
I don't believe that every criminal has a debt to society, because I think it depends on the crime. But if a person does commit a crime, I think the only debt that they have to pay is to the person who was affected by the crime that they committed. So if a person were to, say, steal a car, then maybe that could be repaid, but I think that if a person permanently affected another one with the crime that they committed, that debt can never be repaid.
I think that Perry Thomas did not repay his debt to society, despite the time he had served in prison, because he only served a minimal amount of time, despite that he was given a maximum of 15 years. He only served 6. And also, based on the book he had written, he didn't show any signs of being regretful as to what he had done. Also, we are not sure entirely, like, the repercussions of the crime he had committed, so we are not sure as to whether there was anything more that, anything worse that he had caused, and he did not, as per the book, he did not do anything outside of outside of prison when he got out, to help the family or his community, other than writing this book, that would help him repay back society or the family, or the person that he actually shot.
I think Perry Thomas in some ways was able to repay his debt to society, but I don't think he was able to repay his debt to the police officer that he shot. While he was in jail, he learned about a lot of things about peace through the religion of Islam and through education. He earned his high school diploma, and once he was released from prison, he wrote a book and he became an advocate for education. So I think through that, he repaid his debt to society by being a very productive member of our country. But from what we've read in the book, he didn't show a lot of remorse for the crime he committed against the police officer. So I think in that way, he wasn't able to repay that debt to the person that he hurt during his crime.